Rivera Layla, 24 years old, vanished from her apartment complex on Southside Boulevard, Jacksonville, Florida, on a sweltering March night in 2004. There was no blizzard or storm that day, only a thick darkness and the dim yellow glow of streetlights casting over the quiet neighborhood. A Publix supermarket camera captured Layla checking out with a cart full of frozen groceries. By 8:30 p.m., a neighbor on their balcony saw the young woman, arms laden with bags, hurrying up the stairs, offering a fleeting smile in greeting. Half an hour later, the sharp sound of a door slamming echoed through the narrow hallway, the last sound anyone heard from her apartment. What transpired in the next 70 minutes would haunt Jacksonville for nearly 2 decades. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the night of March 18, 2004, Jacksonville was steeped in the humid heat of spring. On Southside Boulevard, the yellow streetlights cast a glow over the damp asphalt, slick with moisture, while the chirping of insects filled the dark thickets, creating an atmosphere both calm and eerily unsettling. Rivera Layla, a 24-year-old accountant at a small local company, lived alone in a second-floor apartment in a quiet low-rise complex. Exhausted from a long day of work, as was her routine, Layla stopped by the nearby Publix supermarket around 8 p.m. to pick up a few items. A cashier later recalled the young woman with neatly tied brown hair and a slightly rushed demeanor, noting that Layla bought an unusually large amount of frozen food and inquired about discounted ice. After leaving the checkout, Layla disappeared into the bustling crowd of the store, leaving behind the final image captured by the camera. Around 8:30 p.m., a neighbor smoking on the third-floor balcony saw Layla return, clutching 2 heavy grocery bags, hurrying up the stairs. She gave a brief nod of greeting before unlocking her apartment and stepping inside. That was the last time anyone could confirm seeing the young woman alive. At exactly 10 p.m., Layla's boyfriend arrived at her apartment. He knocked repeatedly with no response, but when he tried the handle, the door was unlocked. Inside, the living room light blazed brightly. The grocery bag sat untouched on the table, frozen items still unstored, and her phone, wallet, and car keys lay neatly on the table, as if Layla had stepped out for a moment and would soon return. But the apartment was utterly empty, no sign of its occupant, no trace of where she went or was taken. The room seemed frozen in an unfinished moment, everything halted mid-action, except for the inexplicable absence of the young woman. Panicked, her boyfriend called Layla's family. They arrived quickly, searching the apartment, but finding nothing beyond an unsettling silence. Fear mounting, they tried calling her phone repeatedly, but Layla didn't answer. After a desperate search of familiar places yielded nothing, they had no choice but to contact the Jacksonville police to report that a 24-year-old woman had mysteriously vanished from her own apartment. No one could have predicted that this call would mark the beginning of one of the city's coldest cases, spanning nearly 2 decades. Within minutes, as the 911 dispatcher relayed the information to the nearest patrol unit, the clock ticked toward midnight. Police cars with slowly spinning red and blue lights pulled into the Southside Boulevard apartment complex's parking lot, their beams reflecting off the damp asphalt. Curious residents peered from behind curtains, while Layla's family stood dazed at the foot of the stairs, frantically pointing the way for the authorities. Her boyfriend, in a state of panic, said the door was open, unlocked. The lights were on, the bags still on the table. But she wasn't there. Those frantic words became the first lid for the criminal investigators as they entered the second-floor apartment where a young woman had vanished without a trace. The small apartment was bathed in the harsh white glow of fluorescent lights, but the brightness only made the scene feel colder. On the dining table, 2 Publix plastic bags sat neatly, the frozen vegetables and boxed meats inside beginning to thaw, leaving wet streaks on the wooden surface. A wooden chair lay tilted, its leg caught on the table's edge, as if someone had bumped into it or knocked it over in haste. Crime scene technicians fanned out across the room, snapping photos, numbering evidence, and meticulously noting every detail. Under ultraviolet light, they noticed faint drag marks on the tiled living room floor. The marks stretched from the middle of the room, near the dining table, toward the hallway leading to the front door. Not distinct footprints, but their distorted shape suggested something heavy, or a body, had been dragged. The lead investigator paused for a moment, then jotted in his notebook, possible struggle in the living room, victim subdued, and moved out. The door handle became the next focus. After dusting with fluorescent powder, a clear set of fingerprints emerged. A preliminary comparison with Layla's and her boyfriend's prints, taken at the scene, showed no match. "We've got an unknown set of prints," a technician reported. The prints were photographed, lifted with specialized tape, and carefully sealed in an evidence bag. In a missing persons case with no body, these unfamiliar fingerprints were a rare and critical piece of evidence. On the gray sofa near the window, a technician bent down to retrieve a single long dark hair caught in the cushioned seam. Layla had light brown hair, making this find immediately significant, and it was placed into a glass vial. Under the light, the hair gleamed black, starkly different from the victim's. It could belong to a perpetrator or someone present in the apartment when Layla disappeared. The investigation extended beyond the apartment to the hallway. A thin layer of dust on the tiled floor revealed faint shoe prints leading toward the emergency stairwell rather than the elevator. The prints were incomplete but large enough to suggest they belonged to a man, not a woman. Their position and direction indicated someone left the scene quickly, possibly dragging or carrying something heavy. All these findings were swiftly documented in a preliminary report. The lead investigator concluded, no signs of forced entry. The door was intact, undamaged. The victim likely opened the door for someone familiar or non-threatening. The scene suggests a brief struggle, leading to the victim being forcibly removed via the emergency stairwell. This report, bolded on the first page of the case file, marked a turning point. This was no longer a simple missing persons case, but the start of a serious criminal investigation. At 2 a.m., as the final evidence bag was sealed, the apartment remained brightly lit but eerily silent. Outside in the hallway, Layla's family sat in despair, watching as boxes of samples were carried to the forensic van. In the stifling Florida night, the low-rise complex seemed to hold its breath, and all that remained of Layla's presence was a toppled chair, unstored grocery bags, faint drag marks on the floor, and the thick silence of an apartment that had just witnessed the opening act of a mystery. But as the red and blue lights faded from the parking lot, the case was only beginning. The police knew the next step was to expand the search beyond these four walls. As dawn broke on March 19, 2004, over Jacksonville's skyline, the humid air still carried a faint mist over the quiet streets. The early light illuminated the Southside Boulevard apartment complex, where authorities had worked tirelessly through the night. Now the search officially began. Police cars lined the front yard, their flashing lights off, but yellow tape still cordoning off the entrance. Layla's family stood silently, anxiously watching as K-9 units were brought into the building. Investigators led the dogs through the second-floor hallway, letting them sniff Layla's clothing from her bedroom. Immediately, the dogs followed the scent straight to her apartment door, then down the stairwell. They stopped at the emergency exit, barking softly and wagging their tails, before losing the trail on the asphalt lot outside. This confirmed the previous night's theory: Layla was forcibly removed through the emergency stairwell. From that point, the search expanded to a 5-mile radius. The apartment complex's parking lot was checked first. Residents' cars and small trucks were inspected closely, but nothing unusual was found. Layla's vehicle, a silver Toyota Corolla, remained in its usual spot, clean, locked, with no signs of tampering or blood. This further supported the theory that Layla did not leave voluntarily in her own car. Next, the team searched a small wooded area behind the complex. Rows of pine trees and dense underbrush were combed through, with officers using sticks, metal detectors, and drones to scan the ground. K-9 units were released onto damp trails, circling but ultimately returning without picking up any further scent. To the northwest, a vacant lot where residents dumped bulky trash was also checked, but aside from soggy cardboard and old tires, nothing related to Layla was found. Another team moved to the banks of the St. Johns River, where murky water flowed quietly under the morning sun. Volunteer divers and waterway police searched the river's edge, but found only rusted beer cans and rotted wood. Nets dragged through the water pulled up nothing but algae. One officer sighed, shaking his head. Nothing here. Meanwhile, detectives conducted urgent interviews with nearby residents. A witness, a man who often walked for exercise in the evenings, reported seeing a gray pickup truck parked near the building around 9 p.m. the previous night. He saw no one inside but noted the vehicle was unfamiliar, not belonging to any resident. This statement was carefully recorded, marked as the first potential lead outside the apartment. Concurrently, the forensic team continued examining the complex's surroundings. They collected a few fabric fibers caught in a chain-link fence out back, sealing them for later analysis. A lighter found under a tree, with no identifiable owner, was also bagged as evidence. Yet these were still fragmented clues, not yet forming a clear picture. By noon, the search radius widened further. Patrol cars cruised major roads, loudspeakers broadcasting Layla's description, approximately 5'5", light brown hair, wearing a green blouse and jeans the night she vanished. But no calls came in reporting sightings from the previous night. It was as if Layla had vanished from the neighborhood in a brief window, leaving behind a lit apartment, untouched groceries, and an inexplicable silence. By day's end, dozens of officers, K-9 units, divers and volunteers had scoured the 5-mile radius. The parking lot, woods, riverbank, and vacant lot yielded no signs of a woman alive or dead. The only lingering clue was the gray pickup truck from the witness's account, a vague shadow that might hold the key to the mystery. But as the sun set on March 19th, the search for Rivera Layla hit a dead end. The police noted their findings with visible tension. A young woman had vanished from a bustling apartment complex without anyone witnessing it, leaving no trace of where she went or was taken after 10 p.m. the previous night. After a day of searching the surrounding area with no trace of Rivera Layla, the police refocused on the building itself, the epicenter of the case. On the evening of March 19th, a team of detectives was assigned to go door to door, interviewing every resident in hopes that someone had heard, seen, or knew something unusual from the brief window between Layla's return from the supermarket and her boyfriend's discovery of her absence. Knocks echoed steadily along the second-floor hallway where Layla lived. A middle-aged woman opened her door, still holding a dish towel. When questioned, she recalled that a few days earlier, while taking out the trash in the afternoon, she had glimpsed a strange man in the hallway. He wasn't a resident, tall, with short black hair, wearing a dark-colored shirt. He leaned against the wall, as if waiting for someone, but turned away silently when she passed. At the time, she thought he might be a friend of a resident, but now, in hindsight, the detail felt ominous. The detective took detailed notes, asking her to describe the man as precisely as possible for a sketch. At the apartment below, a man in his 50s said he heard an odd noise around 9:45 p.m. on the night Layla disappeared. A loud thud, like a chair or object falling, followed by a few seconds of silence. He briefly thought the upstairs neighbors might be arguing or dropping something, so he didn't pay further attention. No screams, just a distinct impact. Then nothing, he emphasized. This matched eerily with the scene police had observed: a toppled chair in Layla's living room and drag marks on the floor. The more they interviewed, the clearer it became. No one in the entire building recalled seeing Layla leave her apartment. Those returning late didn't encounter her, and those passing through the hallway after 9 p.m. saw no one. Her disappearance was as if she had evaporated from her own room without a trace. To verify, the police compared the faint shoe prints from the emergency stairwell to residents' footwear. Every pair was checked, from a first-floor worker's boots to a third-floor student's sneakers. None matched. The prints were larger than most men's shoes in the building, and the tread pattern didn't resemble common shoes sold locally. This suggested the perpetrator was likely not a resident, but an outsider. The police also questioned third-floor residents with a view of the parking lot. A young woman who often studied by her window recalled seeing headlights from an unfamiliar gray pickup truck around 9 p.m. She couldn't see the license plate due to her curtains and was too focused on her books to notice more. Her account aligned with the earlier witness who reported the truck. The detectives patiently recorded every detail, knowing that in a missing persons case, the truth often lies in seemingly trivial observation. An unusual noise, a strange figure, an unfamiliar vehicle, these began to form a picture. Layla may have been watched by an outsider, approached in her apartment, and forcibly taken out through the emergency stairwell. As night fell again, the interview team finalized their initial witness report. They had no definitive proof, but they had a vague sketch of an unknown man, a suspicious time frame around 9:45 p.m., and shoe prints not belonging to residents. The pieces were scattered, but they all pointed to one conclusion: Rivera Layla's disappearance was not a voluntary departure, but the result of a deliberate act, and the perpetrator had likely planned carefully to escape unnoticed. After interviewing all the residents in the building without any decisive testimony, the police shifted to the next step in their investigation, narrowing down Rivera Layla's closest relationships. Typically, mysterious disappearances stem from someone known to the victim, and those closest are the first to be ruled out or verified. On the morning of March 20th, the detective in charge of the case met Layla's boyfriend at the Jacksonville Police Department's interrogation room. He was a serviceman stationed at a nearby naval base. In his detailed statement, he outlined his exact timeline the night Layla vanished. He was at the base from the start of his shift until leaving at 9:50 p.m. Then drove straight to her apartment, arriving around 10 p.m. Gate logs and surveillance footage from the base corroborated his account. A fellow serviceman also confirmed they were together on duty until the end of the shift. Thus, Layla's boyfriend was deemed to have a solid alibi. Still, the police kept his file as a key witness, as he was the first to discover her disappearance. Next, the detectives visited Layla's workplace, a small to medium accounting firm in downtown Jacksonville. Her colleagues described her as a dedicated employee with no personal conflicts or financial disputes. Her supervisor confirmed Layla was reserved, focused on her work, with no signs of stress or threats. The police reviewed her work computer, finding no suspicious emails or threatening messages. The workplace environment seemed to offer no direct leads to her disappearance. However, when speaking with Layla's close friends, those she often hung out with on weekends, the investigators uncovered a notable detail. One friend recalled that a few weeks prior, Layla had texted, complaining that she felt someone was watching her while shopping at night. She described an eerie feeling when leaving the Publix parking lot, occasionally hearing footsteps behind her, but seeing no one when she turned around. Initially, her friends dismissed it as paranoia, but in light of her disappearance, this detail caught the police's attention. To verify, the police immediately requested all surveillance footage from Publix for the preceding weeks. Although the 2004 camera systems were rudimentary and low resolution, some clips showed Layla shopping at the same evening hours, with a blurry figure of a man standing at a distance in the parking lot on multiple occasions. His face was unclear, but his tall build and dark hair vaguely matched the neighbor's description of the strange man in the hallway. While not definitive evidence, it led detectives to lean toward the theory that Layla had been stalked, possibly for weeks. Simultaneously, Layla's phone records were thoroughly analyzed. The call log from the carrier showed no strange calls on the evening of March 18th. Her last call was to a close friend at 8:15 p.m., just before leaving the supermarket, discussing plans to meet that weekend, nothing alarming or urgent. This all but ruled out the possibility that Layla left voluntarily or fled. Someone planning a weekend with friends, leaving behind her wallet, phone, keys, and untouched groceries, showed no signs of intentional departure. After investigating all close relationships, boyfriend, colleagues, and friends, the police found no clear motive. The boyfriend had an alibi. The workplace was uneventful, and her friends had no conflicts. The only haunting detail remained: Layla's admission of feeling watched, coupled with the neighbor's sighting of a strange man and the gray pickup truck seen the night she vanished. When compiling the information into a report, the lead investigator noted, "It's highly likely this was the act of an outsider, premeditated, who had been watching the victim. No personal motives among friends or family have been identified." The case began shifting from close relationships to a broader scope, an unknown figure with clear intent. With limited evidence, the team knew they would need to rely on the smallest clues to track down whoever made a 24-year-old woman vanish from her apartment in under half an hour. Having ruled out close personal connections, the investigation team returned to the scant physical evidence they had. Every trace from Rivera Layla's apartment was sent to the forensics lab: the unknown fingerprints on the door handle, the dark hair caught on the sofa, the faint shoe prints on the emergency stairwell. But to build a complete picture, the police needed more: images, witnesses, or anything confirming Layla's movements after leaving the supermarket. The first step was to re-examine the security footage from Publix. The recording from the evening of March 18, 2004, was extracted and reviewed frame by frame. At 8:12 p.m., Layla appeared on camera at the checkout, wearing a green blouse and jeans, looking hurried but not panicked. She paid for 2 bags of groceries and left, her final image pushing through the glass doors to the parking lot. The team zoomed in on each frame, searching for a suspicious figure following her. However, no one exited at the same time, and there was no clear sign of anyone trailing her. The parking lot entrance camera only captured a few cars coming and going, none particularly linked to Layla. Next, the police requested data from the Department of Transportation for traffic cameras along the route from the supermarket to the apartment complex. But in 2004, Jacksonville's camera network was sparse. Only 2 cameras at major intersections were available, neither directly facing the complex. Reviewing footage from 8:20 to 8:40 p.m., they spotted a few cars turning towards Southside, including a silver Toyota Corolla matching Layla's, moving normally. Beyond that, nothing stood out. No gray pickup truck appeared clearly. Nor did the mysterious man. Meanwhile, the forensic team began analyzing the unknown fingerprints from the door handle. The prints were entered into CODIS, the national database for DNA and fingerprints, but after days of waiting, the result came back negative: no matches. This meant the person who left the prints had no criminal record or wasn't in the system. It was a significant setback, as direct evidence like fingerprints was their best hope in a case with no body. The dark hair from the sofa was also tested. However, nuclear DNA couldn't be fully extracted because the hair lacked a root. Forensics only confirmed it wasn't Layla's. Another lead hit a dead end. The faint shoe prints from the emergency stairwell were photographed and compared to a database of criminal footwear. Experts estimated they were men's athletic shoes, size 10 to 11, but the tread pattern was too faint to identify the brand. When compared to shoes from all residents in the building, none matched. This suggested the shoes belonged to an outsider or a casual visitor. In the context of Layla's disappearance, it hinted at the presence of someone not living in the complex. The detectives gathered in the Jacksonville Police Department's meeting room, staring at a whiteboard covered in notes. On one side were witness details: the strange man in the hallway, the gray pickup truck at 9 p.m., the loud noise at 9:45 p.m. On the other were physical evidence: fingerprints not in CODIS, and unidentified hair, shoe prints not matching residents. All pointed to the likelihood that the perpetrator was an outsider, possibly having stalked Layla for days before acting. But the harsh truth was that the police had no solid evidence to move forward. No license plate, no clear image of a suspect, no definitive DNA. The preliminary report stated clearly, "At this time, the case has no leads pointing to a specific suspect." Continued collection of community and external information is needed. In a brief press conference the next day, the police spokesperson could only confirm that Layla had vanished under suspicious circumstances and the investigation was ongoing. Her family stood behind the police, faces weary from sleepless nights. For them, each piece of news, unmatched fingerprints, no camera footage, unidentified hair, felt like a door slamming shut on hope. For the investigators, the silence of the evidence was their greatest enemy. Despite having a few puzzle pieces, they couldn't form a complete picture. The perpetrator remained a shadow beyond their reach. Rivera Layla, 24, seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving only clues that led to a dead end they didn't know when they could break through. A month after Rivera Layla's disappearance, the case remained stagnant. The initial leads, unknown fingerprints, faint shoe prints, dark hair, yielded no concrete results. The community began whispering about an unsolvable case while her family grew exhausted from waiting. Amid this heavy atmosphere, an unexpected event occurred. On April 20, 2004, a plain white envelope with no return address was delivered directly to the Jacksonville police station. Inside was a handwritten note, the scrawled but clear text reading, "She's alive. Stop looking." No address, no further details, just a few cold words, like a message from someone holding the secret. The lead detective froze upon reading it, as it could mean Layla was still alive somewhere. But if false, it was merely a cruel prank, wasting time and diverting the investigation. The envelope was sent to the FBI's forensics lab for analysis. Handwriting experts noted the left slanting script, with distinct crossbars and dots, characteristic of a left-handed writer. They also suggested it was likely a man's handwriting, based on the heavy pressure and stroke structure. However, tests for DNA on the envelope's flap and paper found no saliva or biological traces. The sender had been careful not to lick the envelope and possibly wore gloves while writing and sealing it. This made the letter even more suspicious. It provided no new information, no indication of Layla's whereabouts, only sowing doubt. The police had to consider, was this truly from someone involved, or a cruel hoax by an outsider following the news? FBI behavioral analysts were consulted and concluded the letter was likely written to misdirect, reducing search pressure around the apartment complex. The brief, detailless writing suggested the sender aimed to cause confusion rather than reveal truth. Still, with a case growing cold so quickly, the police couldn't ignore it. They reviewed records of all left-handed men living within a 5-mile radius of the scene. Dozens were interviewed, from factory workers to security guards to college students. None had a direct connection to Layla, and none were confirmed as the letter's author. Layla's family, upon hearing about the letter, initially felt a spark of hope that she was alive. But when the police explained the analysis, suggesting it was likely a tactic to buy time, that hope turned to bitter disappointment. Layla's father said in a brief press conference, "If someone thinks this is a joke, it's the cruelest joke a family could endure." After analysis, the letter was filed as disruptive evidence in the case file. It was kept as a significant item. But even the detectives admitted it offered no specific leads. Instead, it only reinforced one thing: the person behind Rivera Layla's disappearance was cunning enough to leave no openings and willing to use psychological tactics to throw off the police. By March 2005, a year after Rivera Layla vanished, no one at the Jacksonville Police Department could say they'd made significant progress. The initial investigation, intense crime scene analysis, widespread searches, dozens of witness interviews, and meticulous evidence testing ultimately led to dead ends. No body, no direct witnesses, no clear picture of who might have taken Layla from her apartment on March 18th the previous year. All that remained were small pieces of evidence, carefully sealed and stored in a cold archive, a few unknown fingerprints, a dark hair skin flakes under Layla's nails, and a copy of the anonymous letter claiming she was alive. The original team had done all they could within the limits of 2004 technology. The hair's DNA lacked a route for identification. The fingerprints, entered into CODIS, matched no known records. The faint shoe prints on the stairwell were analyzed exhaustively, but couldn't pinpoint a brand or model. Street cameras, sparse and blurry, offered nothing beyond Layla leaving Publix with her groceries. And the anonymous letter, once stirring faint hope in her family, was deemed disruptive, with no investigative value. Throughout that year, the police never stopped searching. They followed dozens of public tips, each sparking a small hope. One caller claimed to have seen a woman resembling Layla in Georgia. Another swore they spotted her at an Orlando gas station. All were checked. All were false. Layla's family held prayer vigils, printed flyers, and posted signs around the city with the words, "Missing Rivera Layla, 24." But each new poster only highlighted the harsh truth. A year had passed, and nothing new had emerged. Inside the police station, the atmosphere grew heavier. Thick case files piled up on desks, reports repeatedly noting no new leads. Original detectives were reassigned to other cases. Layla's case was mentioned less often in morning briefings, becoming one of many unsolved missing persons cases the city faced. A file sitting silently in a cold metal cabinet in the evidence archive. In a final effort, Layla's family hired a private investigator. He reviewed all statements, trying to connect scattered details: the strange man in the hallway, the gray pickup truck, the noise at 9:45 p.m., but without direct witnesses, cameras, or new evidence. Even he was stumped. Without a body or secondary scene, it's nearly impossible to prove anything, he concluded. In a report to the family, local media, which had covered the case heavily in the early weeks, now only mentioned it on anniversary dates. A small article in the Florida Times-Union in March 2005 read, 1 year after Rivera Layla, 24, vanished from her Southside Boulevard apartment, police continue to seek public information. To date, no evidence confirms whether she is alive or dead. For her family, the silence was torment. Every phone ring brought hope for news, any news. But every call from the police was a dry update. We still have nothing new. They lived in limbo, unsure if their daughter was dead or alive, unsure whether to hope or grieve. By late spring 2005, the Jacksonville Police Department officially classified the Rivera Layla case as a cold case. The decision was recorded, all evidence moved to cold storage, and the file labeled "Missing Person, Rivera Layla, Cold Case." This meant the case would no longer be actively investigated daily, only revisited if new leads emerged. For the police, it was a necessary step to allocate resources elsewhere. But for Layla's family, it felt like a verdict. Justice for their daughter had been swallowed by time. On the 1-year anniversary of her disappearance, her family lit small candles outside her old apartment, where everything had frozen on that fateful night. The flickering flames reflected on a photo of the smiling 24-year-old. Police stood by quietly, unsure what to say beyond a vague promise, "We won't forget." But deep down, they all knew, until new technology or an unexpected coincidence emerged, the Rivera Layla case would remain a silent file in the dark of the evidence archive, where hundreds of unsolved cases awaited a miracle. 6 years after Rivera Layla's disappearance, her case file was unexpectedly pulled from storage. In early 2010, the Jacksonville Police Department formed a dedicated cold case unit tasked with reviewing long-dormant cases, hoping new technology and fresh perspectives could yield breakthroughs. The Rivera Layla file, stamped cold case since 2005, was prioritized due to its mysterious nature. A young woman vanished from her own apartment, leaving groceries and personal items behind, with no witnesses and no trace of where she went. The new team consisted of 3 experienced detectives and 2 forensic technicians. They spent weeks reviewing reports, crime scene photos, and analyzing every piece of evidence. In the meeting room, Layla's photo was pinned at the center of a whiteboard, surrounded by relationship diagrams, area maps, and lists of witnesses who had provided statements. Key details like strange man in the hallway, gray pickup truck, and noise at 9:45 p.m. were written large and circled in red. One of the team's first steps was resubmitting the unknown fingerprints from the door handle to AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system, which had expanded significantly in the past 6 years. In 2004, the database mainly held records of serious offenders. By 2010, many states had added thousands of prints from minor arrests. Jacksonville police hoped this expansion might produce a match. When the results came back weeks later, the team opened the file with anticipation. But the stark message read, "No match found." The fingerprints still belonged to an unknown figure, not in the legal system. Once again, hope turned to disappointment. Undeterred, the detectives revisited the anonymous letter from April 2004. They asked the FBI to reanalyze it with new technology, including ink scanning to identify the pen type and ink age. Results showed it was written with a common ballpoint pen, untraceable to a source. No DNA was found, as the sender had left no biological traces. The left-handed male handwriting conclusion remained unchanged. Nothing new emerged. The team also pursued the gray pickup truck lead, reviewing 2004 vehicle registrations in the area, filtering hundreds of matching trucks. But no evidence pinpointed a specific truck at the building the night Layla vanished. The witnesses couldn't recall license plates or distinguishing details. With every avenue blocked, the team had to admit the case still lacked the critical element, a body or a direct witness. Without either, all theories were speculative. They compiled a report hundreds of pages long, listing everything verified and every possibility ruled out. On the final page, the familiar phrase reappeared, "No new leads, evidence preserved." By late 2010, the Rivera Layla file was returned to storage. The evidence bags, fingerprints, hair, skin flakes were placed in a specialized cold storage unit, carefully labeled. Layla's photo was removed from the whiteboard, replaced by another case. For the team, it was a harsh reality. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't bring Layla back to the light of justice. For her family, the news of nothing new was all too familiar. They'd heard it countless times over 6 years, but each time, it cut like a knife. Her father, who had hoped the renewed investigation would open a new path, faced only silence. On Christmas Eve 2010, he told a local reporter, "We no longer want promises. We just need an answer. Any answer." And so, once again, the Rivera Layla case slipped back into the shadows. It returned to being a cold file, stored in a frigid metal cabinet, awaiting technology yet to be invented, a witness yet to come forward, or a random coincidence to reignite the investigation. Until then, Layla's name lived only on a case label, next to the stark words, "Missing Person, Cold Case." 9 years after the 2010 investigation team had to close Rivera Layla's case once again, fate took an unexpected turn. In 2019, Florida allocated new funding for cold case units, focusing on applying modern DNA technology and genetic genealogy. A breakthrough that had solved high-profile cases across the U.S. Among the first case files selected for review was that of Rivera Layla, the 24-year-old who vanished from her apartment in 2004. The evidence bags, sealed and stored in cold storage for 15 years, were brought back into the light. Technicians carefully checked the seals before transferring each sample to the lab. Skin flakes from under Layla's nails, the dark hair found on the sofa, and the unidentified fingerprints on the door handle. With older technology, these were merely cataloged and stored. Now, advancements in DNA analysis promised to unlock minute samples previously deemed insufficient. The DNA samples were sent to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a pioneering lab combining genetic analysis with snapshot imaging technology. Weeks later, the first result left the investigation team in stunned silence. The DNA from the skin under Layla's nails belonged to a male, not a female, further confirming the likelihood that Layla struggled with her assailant before disappearing. Beyond identifying gender, Parabon analyzed genetic traits, indicating a high likelihood of Southern European Mediterranean ancestry, possibly Italian, Greek, or Spanish. Genetic phenotyping suggested the suspect had black hair, brown eyes, slightly tanned skin, and was estimated to be 25 to 40 years old in 2004. The lead detective, staring at the snapshot rendering on the screen, whispered, "For the first time in 15 years, we have a face." The rendering was printed and pinned to the Cold Case Unit's investigation board. It wasn't perfectly accurate, but showed basic features: a male, unremarkable enough to blend into a community, yet distinct enough for someone to recognize if they'd met him. The team felt a surge of excitement at finally glimpsing the shadow of the mysterious figure. Simultaneously, the team requested another CODIS comparison, now significantly expanded since 2010, but once again, the response was no match. The man had never been arrested or DNA tested, leaving no record in the system. However, they now had more than before, a complete genetic profile usable for genealogical tracing. The Jacksonville police decided to publicly release the snapshot rendering at a press conference. The image of a man with black hair, brown eyes, and an average face appeared on a large screen behind the podium. This is the estimated genetic likeness of the man whose DNA was found in Rivera Layla's apartment in 2004, the spokesperson stated firmly. "We urge anyone who recognizes these features or has suspicions to contact us immediately." Local media covered the story extensively. Hotlines received dozens of calls. Some claimed the image resembled a former coworker, others a past resident of the apartment complex. But upon investigation, most tips were vague coincidences, with no clear suspect emerging. Still, the new technology shifted the case's atmosphere. After years in the dark, Layla's file was revitalized with a scientific-focused approach. Retired detectives who had worked the case from the start returned to assist, unable to hide their excitement. "Back then, we had nothing but a messy room and a few faint clues," one said. "Now, at least we know who was there." Though they lacked a name, the team had a portrait. With that portrait, they could do what was impossible 15 years ago: use genetic genealogy to trace the suspect's family and relatives. The path to finding the perpetrator of Rivera Layla's disappearance was finally emerging after over a decade of silence. The snapshot rendering from Parabon was just the starting point. To turn a hypothetical face into a real name, the Jacksonville police turned to a new powerful tool: genetic genealogy. This technology didn't require the suspect to be in a criminal database like CODIS. Instead, it compared distinct DNA segments to open databases where millions of Americans had voluntarily submitted their genetic data for ancestry research or family trees. In the summer of 2019, Parabon specialists began the process. They uploaded the DNA from the skin under Layla's nails to GEDmatch, the largest platform for community genetic research. The system returned numerous cousin matches, people sharing small DNA segments with the suspect. Most were distant relatives, but by piecing them together, genealogists began identifying specific family branches. The data pointed to Southern European ancestry, particularly Italian and Greek. Some cousin matches had families settled in Florida since the early 20th century migrations. After weeks of analysis, the family tree narrowed to a specific lineage, with the DeLuca family, of Italian descent and long settled in northeast Florida, standing out. Within this sprawling family tree, only a few members matched Parabon's age range: males born between 1965 and 1980, meaning 25 to 40 years old in 2004 when Layla disappeared. The team screened each name, ruling out those with clear alibis or who were far from Jacksonville that year. Ultimately, a few names remained. Among them, one stood out: Anthony DeLuca. Anthony, born in 1976, was the son of a long-established Italian family in Florida. Residency records showed that in 2004, he rented an apartment in the Southside Boulevard complex, where Rivera Layla lived. This revelation stunned the team. For years, they'd considered the perpetrator an outsider targeting Layla by chance. Now genealogy suggested the suspect might have lived in the same building. The police reviewed old records and realized Anthony had never been on the initial suspect list. Back then, he drew no attention, had no criminal record, and wasn't mentioned by witnesses. Employment records showed he worked as a laborer, then moved around Florida. He had no stable marriage or consistent tax records. A transient lifestyle leaving few traces. The lead investigator noted, subject fits male, Southern European descent, lived at the scene, left shortly after the victim's disappearance. From an anonymous DNA sample to an Italian lineage and genealogical data, and now a specific name. That name had crossed paths with Layla's life. Shared the same hallways, the same stairs. Yet no one had ever considered he could be the one who took Layla from her apartment that fateful night. In 2019, after 15 years of fog, the Rivera Layla case finally had a real lead. The cold case unit's whiteboard now held not just a snapshot face but a name, Anthony DeLuca. With that name, the investigation was poised to enter a new phase, tracking, verifying, and proving the truth. Anthony DeLuca's name appeared on the whiteboard like a new beacon, but for the police, a name was never enough. They needed to understand his past, scrutinize every detail in his records, and tie him to that fateful night in 2004. The cold case team began by digging into old Duval County Court archives and civil complaint records in the city. Immediately, a suspicious detail emerged. Anthony had been accused of harassing women in Jacksonville twice. The first incident, in 2002, involved a student who reported Anthony following her to her dorm and knocking on her door multiple times. When police were called, he denied it, claiming he was just walking the same way. With insufficient evidence, the case was dropped. A year later, in 2003, another woman near the Southside Market reported a man staring and following her to the parking lot. Her description vaguely matched Anthony, but again no specific crime occurred, and the matter faded. The detectives pinned these documents to the board. Two separate incidents, both involving harassing young women, the exact behavior pattern they suspected with Layla. He was never charged, but the repeated pattern is alarming, one investigator remarked. The team went further, contacting Anthony's old acquaintances. A high school friend described him as always obsessive. He recalled Anthony frequently talking about a young woman in their apartment complex in 2004. The friend didn't remember her name, but described her in a way chillingly similar to Layla. Light brown hair, office worker, often at Publix in the evenings. He talked like he was fixated on her, the friend said, once even saying, "She doesn't even notice I'm around." This detail sent chills through the team. If true, Anthony wasn't just a random resident, but had been fixated on Layla for some time. It aligned with what Layla had told friends before vanishing, feeling watched at the market, hearing footsteps behind her. Residency records were also reviewed. After Layla's disappearance, Anthony abruptly ended his lease at Southside Boulevard. Records showed that in June 2004, just 3 months after the incident, he left Jacksonville for Orlando. The timing raised suspicions. If he was just a regular tenant, why leave so quickly? The detective asked. The move had no clear reason, no job change or family ties. It felt calculated. Piecing together the anonymous letter meant to mislead in 2004, the prior harassment incidents, and the fixation on a young woman in the complex, DeLuca's name loomed larger in the investigators' minds. Though lacking legal proof, they knew they were closer to the perpetrator than ever. An internal report noted, Anthony DeLuca, Southside resident in 2004, left Jacksonville shortly after Rivera Layla's disappearance. History of harassing women. Witness confirms obsession with a woman matching Layla's description. Further investigation needed, focusing on surveillance and obtaining comparison DNA. In the cold case unit's chilly room, silence fell as the detectives stared at DeLuca's file. They all understood. Suspicion had reached a point that couldn't be ignored. After over 15 years of uncertainty, the shadowy figure finally had a name, a face, a past. The only question now was how to move Anthony DeLuca from suspect to defendant in court. By 2022, Nearly 2 decades after Rivera Layla's disappearance, all suspicions converged on one name: Anthony DeLuca. The towering case file in the cold case unit pointed clearly. He lived in the Southside Boulevard complex, had a history of harassing women, was described by an old friend as obsessed with a young woman in the building, and abruptly left Jacksonville months after the disappearance. But these were still circumstantial. To turn suspicion into legal evidence, the police needed one thing: direct DNA comparison from DeLuca. In April 2022, a covert surveillance team was sent to Orlando, where DeLuca lived in a small rented apartment near a suburban park. Now in his mid-40s, he worked odd jobs for a local transport company, living reclusively with little neighbor interaction. Detectives took turns watching him, from the coffee shop he visited mornings to the park where he walked weekends. All was recorded with hidden cameras, patiently awaiting an opportunity. That opportunity came on a sweltering late May afternoon. DeLuca sat alone on a park bench, drinking a canned beer. He lingered, staring into the distance, then tossed the can into a trash bin before leaving. The waiting investigators seized the moment. As DeLuca disappeared, a disguised forensic technician approached, gloved hands retrieving the can and sealing it in an evidence bag. To them, it wasn't just trash, it could be the final piece to close an 18-year mystery. The DNA sample from the can's rim was rushed to Florida's state lab. For a week, the team sat on edge. They'd faced too many disappointments in this case, from the anonymous letter to vague witness accounts and fruitless fingerprint matches. But this time, hope was stronger. If DeLuca was the man in Layla's apartment in 2004, this can would prove it. On June 6, 2022, the results arrived. The lab report stated clearly, full DNA profile match, 100% probability. The DNA from DeLuca's beer can perfectly match the DNA from the skin under Layla's nails, the night she vanished. No more doubts, no more theories. This was the same man. In the cold case unit's small meeting room, silence held for minutes. Only the hum of the air conditioner and the harsh neon lights filled the space. Then a detective exhaled softly. Finally, we've got him. After 18 years, the Rivera Layla case turned a new page. From an unsolvable mystery, it now had a suspect tied by forensic evidence. All reports were immediately sent to the prosecutor's office. A meticulous arrest plan was drawn up. As DeLuca was no longer just a name in a file, he was the official suspect, backed by undeniable DNA evidence. In April 2023, after nearly a year of covert surveillance and case building, an arrest warrant for Anthony DeLuca was signed. Orlando's SWAT team, coordinating with Jacksonville detectives, launched the operation early on April 12. Dawn was still foggy, the quiet residential area unaware that it would soon be the center of a shocking arrest. At 5:30 a.m., unmarked armored vehicles stopped outside DeLuca's single-story apartment. Figures in tactical gear wielding rifles swiftly surrounded the property. A loudspeaker blared, "Anthony DeLuca, this is the police. Open the door now." No response came. After 10 seconds, the signal was given. The front door was breached, and the team stormed in within seconds. Inside, DeLuca barely had time to react. Subdued in his living room, hands cuffed behind his back, face pressed to the cold floor. The 47-year-old managed only a few hoarse words, "This can't be." After DeLuca was safely detained, the police began searching his home. In the garage, under a dusty wooden crate, they found a small metal box. Inside was something that made everyone pause, a silver bracelet engraved with Layla. Though tarnished by time, the inscription was clear. Layla's family later confirmed it was the bracelet she always wore, and it had vanished with her in March 2004. In a nightstand drawer, police also found a leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with scribbled entries. Most were disjointed, but one passage chilled everyone. Dated March 18, 2004, it read, "Tonight, she finally knew I existed. No turning back." Those words, like a veiled confession, tied directly to the day Layla disappeared. News of the arrest spread rapidly. That afternoon, local TV aired a special report, Jacksonville's 2004 cold case. Suspect Anthony DeLuca, 47, arrested in Orlando. Footage showed DeLuca, head bowed, hands cuffed, being led away. Jacksonville residents, accustomed to Layla's case being a dormant file, were stunned. Social media erupted with hundreds of comments. Can't believe he lived in the same complex. 18 years, and the truth finally shines. Layla's family, in a brief press conference, broke down upon hearing about the bracelet. Her father, choking back tears, said, "It's proof my daughter was in his hands. For years, we begged for an answer. Now it's here, though it's far too late." At the Jacksonville police press conference, the lead detective couldn't hide his emotion. "We've followed this case for 19 years. Tonight, justice is finally speaking." He emphasized that the DNA, bracelet, and notebook were three pieces tying DeLuca to Layla's disappearance. The city buzzed with energy. Florida's major newspapers ran front-page headlines, "Jacksonville cold case solved after 19 years." Residents flocked to the old Southside Boulevard complex, leaving flowers and candles at the stairs where Layla once lived. A makeshift memorial sign appeared, scrawled by a resident, "Layla, we finally hear you." For the police, the arrest wasn't just the end of a long cold case, but a testament to DNA technology and relentless persistence. For the family, it was bittersweet relief. They knew Layla wouldn't return, but her captor was no longer free. For Jacksonville, it was a community shock. A reminder that sometimes the darkest dangers lurk in the most familiar hallways. After his arrest and transfer to the Jacksonville Police Station's interrogation room, Anthony DeLuca sat across from two veteran detectives in a thickly tense atmosphere. His face was ashen, eyes avoiding contact, wrists still red from the cuffs. When a detective opened with a direct question, "Do you know Rivera Layla?" DeLuca immediately shook his head, his voice raspy. "I don't know her. You've got the wrong guy." He tried to stay calm, occasionally sneering, claiming the police were framing him. But then, a thick case file was slammed onto the table. Inside was the DNA report. The sample from the beer can he discarded in Orlando matched perfectly with the DNA under Layla's nails the night she vanished. The detectives didn't say much, just slid the paper toward him. "This isn't a theory, it's science," they emphasized. DeLuca stared at the text, his eyes twitching, but he said nothing more. The silence was so heavy, the room echoed only with the ticking of the wall clock. The detectives shifted tactics, focusing on witness details. They presented the statement from the evening walker on March 18, 2004, who saw a gray pickup truck parked by the building, matching DeLuca's vehicle at the time. They described its license plate, confirmed in 2004 registration records. An old photo of DeLuca standing by the truck was placed on the table. "You were there. People saw you. You can't deny it." DeLuca swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. He stammered weak denials.
I was just passing by. I had nothing to do with her."
When the detectives asked why a silver bracelet engraved with Layla was found in his garage, DeLuca turned away. His hands clenched so tightly, they turned pale. Gone was the sneering, the pretense of calm. Only a thick silence remained, one the police understood well. He knew the wall of evidence had closed around him. In an internal report, the detective noted briefly, "Subject initially denied involvement, when confronted with DNA and witness testimony, went completely silent." Silence indicates clear awareness of undeniable evidence. That night, as DeLuca was returned to the holding cell, his face was pale, his gaze vacant. For the police, it was the final confirmation. 19 years later, the man who made Rivera Layla disappear had no more room to deny. After hours of tense interrogation met with DeLuca's silence, the investigation team knew they needed more to seal the legal trap. The DNA and silver bracelet were enough to make him the prime suspect, but a murder trial required irrefutable evidence, a body or direct traces tied to Layla's death. Thus, a warrant was issued to search all of DeLuca's property, including his small rented Orlando home and the neglected backyard. On April 20th, 2023, forensic experts and a search team arrived with metal detectors and ground scanning equipment. The backyard, overgrown with weeds and littered with fallen branches, looked like a forgotten plot from the outside. But years of experience told the investigators that sometimes the most innocuous places hide the darkest truths. It didn't take long for the ground scanner to detect anomalies beneath the soil. Digging down just over a meter, a musty odor rose, and the first bone fragments appeared. Everyone fell silent for a moment before the technicians carefully collected each piece into evidence bags. The excavation widened, revealing tattered fabric scraps, recognizable as women's jeans and faded green cloth, matching the outfit Layla wore the night she vanished. All evidence was rushed to Florida's state lab. Over a week later, the official results confirmed the DNA extracted from the bones matched the genetic profile of Layla's family. There was no doubt. It was Rivera Layla. After nearly 2 decades, what Jacksonville and her family feared was confirmed. Layla hadn't just disappeared, she had been murdered. This discovery transformed the case. From a mysterious missing persons file, it was officially reclassified as a first-degree murder case. Prosecutors swiftly amended the charges, asserting DeLuca committed premeditated murder and attempted to conceal it by disposing of the body. The clothing fragments found with the bones were direct evidence, corroborating witness accounts of Layla wearing jeans and a green shirt on March 18, 2004. For the Jacksonville community, the news was a second shock. They had clung to faint hopes that Layla might still be alive somewhere. Now, that hope vanished. Yet finding her remains gave her family the closure they needed. They could finally lay her to rest. At a press conference, her mother, sobbing, said, "At least we can put our daughter in the ground, no longer waiting in vain." For the police and prosecutors, the discovery in DeLuca's backyard was the most critical piece. No longer speculation, no longer just a bracelet or vague diary entry. Now there were bones, clothes, and DNA. The evidence chain was complete. DeLuca was obsessed with Layla, was in the building the night she vanished, left DNA, kept her bracelet, wrote a diary entry referencing March 18th, and buried her remains in his backyard. In the investigation report, the lead detective concluded, Rivera Layla case from missing person to murder, perpetrator, Anthony DeLuca. With those words, one of Jacksonville's longest-running mysteries entered a new phase. From the shadows of a cold case, it became a murder charge, ready for justice. With the discovery of Rivera Layla's remains and clothing in Anthony DeLuca's backyard, the case officially moved to the prosecution phase. The Duval County Prosecutor's Office urgently compiled the entire case file, preparing for a trial expected to be a focal point of Florida's attention in 2023. The prosecutors knew they had to build an airtight, seamless chain of evidence. After 19 years, any ambiguity could be exploited by the defense to sow doubt in the jury. In a closed meeting room, thousands of pages of case files were spread out. 4 pillars formed the core of the case against DeLuca. Nidety, the skin under Layla's nails, matched perfectly with DNA from DeLuca's 2022 beer can. This was modern forensic evidence, undeniable. Silver bracelet engraved with Layla's, found in DeLuca's garage, confirmed by her family as her personal item, frequently worn. Personal diary, containing the March 18, 2004, entry. Tonight, she finally knew I existed. No turning back. It clearly referenced Layla and the date of her disappearance. Bones and clothing fragments, DNA confirmed as Layla's, found in DeLuca's backyard. These 4 pieces formed a tight logical chain. DeLuca was obsessed with Layla, approached her on March 18, 2004, struggled, leaving DNA, kept her bracelet, wrote a diary entry about the event, and buried her body to cover it up. The prosecution's strategy was to transform the narrative from a mysterious disappearance to a premeditated murder, concealed for nearly 2 decades. They emphasized the investigation's persistence, DNA technology's power, and DeLuca's cold cruelty. Meanwhile, DeLuca's defense attorneys launched a counterattack. Knowing the evidence was too strong to fully deny, they focused on the validity of genetic genealogy, the starting point that led to DeLuca. Genealogy isn't precise science, a defense lawyer argued in a preliminary hearing. It relies on open databases, which can lead to mistakes. Any distant relative could partially match the DNA. You can't use an ancestry tool to strip someone of their freedom. The prosecution fired back. Genealogy wasn't the sole evidence, it was the path that led us there. We didn't charge DeLuca based on genealogy alone, but because his DNA matched 100% with the crime scene sample. If genealogy was wrong, how did it lead us directly to the one person whose DNA matches the sample under the victim's nails? The debate stretched weeks. Ultimately, the judge issued a pivotal ruling: all evidence, including genealogy data, was admissible in court. He clarified that genealogy was only the investigation's starting point, not the primary evidence. The forensic evidence, DNA, bracelet, diary, and remains, was the foundation of the case. This ruling let the prosecution breathe a sigh of relief. They knew it was the final gateway to bring the case to light. Once the jury heard the full story from Layla's 2004 disappearance, the cold case, the anonymous letter, to the DNA breakthrough 15 years later, they believed no one would doubt DeLuca's guilt. Meanwhile, the media reported relentlessly. Major newspapers ran headlines: Jacksonville cold case headed to trial after 19 years. Reporters hunted every detail from DeLuca's workplace to his Orlando life and the candlelit vigils held by Jacksonville's community to honor Layla. Public pressure mounted, and all awaited a trial promising to reveal the truth. In his cell, DeLuca remained silent, refusing all interviews. His lawyers occasionally appeared, advising they would attack the process, not the substance, but even they knew, with DNA and remains, the path to acquittal was nearly closed. In the final days of preparation, the lead prosecutor gazed at Layla's photo in his office, her 24-year-old eyes seeming to pierce through time. He whispered, "We'll bring you justice, even if it took nearly 2 decades." And so, after 19 years, Jacksonville's most mysterious disappearance entered the trial phase. The preparations were complete. Evidence, witnesses, and a community waiting to hear the truth in the courtroom. On the morning of September 5, 2023, the Duval County courtroom was packed. Outside, dozens of reporters jostled, cameras and microphones raised, awaiting coverage of the trial deemed Jacksonville's most significant in recent history, the prosecution of Anthony DeLuca for first-degree murder in the Rivera Layla case, a cold case spanning nearly 2 decades. As the judge entered, the room fell silent. The 12-person jury sat attentively, facing the prosecution's table stacked with thick files and the defense table where DeLuca sat with 2 lawyers. He wore a white shirt, his face gaunt, eyes still avoiding contact. The lead prosecutor opened with a powerful statement. "This is not just a disappearance, this is a premeditated murder, concealed for nearly 20 years. Today, we will show you the full truth." He began reconstructing the timeline with presentation slides. The first image on the large screen was Layla's college graduation photo. The prosecutor recounted the evening of March 18, 2004, when Layla left work, shopped at Publix at 8:12 p.m., returned home by 8:30 p.m., and vanished without a trace. The next slide showed the apartment crime scene: untouched grocery bags, a toppled chair, drag marks on the floor. He continued, "For years, this case lay in darkness. But with modern DNA technology, we have answers." The next slide displayed the analysis results. DNA from the skin under Layla's nails matched perfectly with DeLuca's 2022 beer can sample. The prosecutor emphasized, "The chance of error is 0. Next came genealogy. The prosecutor briefly explained how the DNA was compared to open databases, leading to the DeLuca family and narrowing to Anthony. Then came physical evidence, a photo of the silver bracelet engraved with Layla found in the suspect's garage. After that, the diary entry from March 18, 2004. Tonight, she finally knew I existed. No turning back. Finally, the prosecutor showed the 2023 excavation site, the pit, jeans fragments, bone shards. His voice lowered. This is where Anthony DeLuca tried to hide the truth. But justice cannot be buried. As the prosecution paused, the courtroom was silent, broken only by the faint scribbling of reporters' pens. The first witness was called, a man who lived near the Southside complex, testifying that on March 18, 2004, he saw a gray pickup truck parked by the building around 9 p.m. Before the court, he pointed directly at DeLuca. That was his truck. I remember clearly because it didn't belong to any resident. The prosecution pressed, "Are you certain of the time?" The witness nodded. I checked my watch while walking by. It was around 9 p.m. This testimony made the jury take notes, many glancing at DeLuca. When their turn came, the defense countered immediately. They argued the evidence was too old. This is a 2004 case. Physical evidence has sat for nearly 2 decades. Soil could be disturbed. DNA could be contaminated. The diary note doesn't directly mention Layla. It's speculation. On the witness, the defense stressed, memory after 19 years cannot be perfectly accurate. People can misremember, especially seeing a truck in the dark. But the prosecution was prepared. They responded, yes, memory can fade, but DNA does not. The DNA under the victim's nails survived 19 years and matches Anthony DeLuca perfectly. Ladies and gentlemen, science doesn't err. The trial's opening day closed with a tense atmosphere. The courtroom held its breath after each presentation. Outside, public opinion split. Some believed the evidence was overwhelming. Others argued the case was too old for absolute fairness. But one thing was certain, this trial would decide not only Anthony DeLuca's fate, but also close Jacksonville's most painful chapter, the disappearance and murder of Rivera Layla. On the trial's second day, the prosecution called their key expert witness, a forensic specialist from Parabon Nanolabs, directly involved in analyzing the DNA in Layla's case. He entered the courtroom with a thick briefcase and a laptop for presentations. His face calm but eyes resolute. The jury sat upright, clearly aware this would be the weightiest evidence. The prosecutor began, "Please explain to the jury the DNA testing process in this case." The experts started with the basics. In 2004, DNA analysis was limited, unable to process the tiny skin sample under Layla's nails. By 2019, technology had advanced, allowing amplification of minute samples. They extracted a full genetic profile from it. He pointed to the screen, displaying a complex genetic chart, colorful bands representing genetic markers. "This is the complete DNA profile of the man who left traces on Layla's body," he said. Next, he explained genealogical tracing, comparing the profile to open GED match data, identifying distant relatives, and building a family tree leading to the DeLuca family, narrowing to Anthony. A complex diagram appeared, branching down to one viable candidate matching age, gender, and location. Anthony DeLuca. "We didn't stop at hypotheses," he stressed. "We obtained a direct DNA sample from Mr. DeLuca for comparison." The next slide showed the 2022 Orlando beer can. The expert clarified, "From this can, we extracted Mr. DeLuca's complete DNA." Comparing the two profiles, the sample under the victim's nails and the can, resulted in a 100% match across all 21 genetic loci. He paused, looking directly at the jury. "The odds of two unrelated people matching like this are 1 in a trillion. Scientifically, it's impossible for anyone but Anthony DeLuca to have left that DNA on Rivera Layla's body." The prosecutor pressed further. "Is there any chance the sample was contaminated or there was an error in the analysis?" The expert answered firmly, "No, we followed national standard protocols. The sample was sealed since 2004, opened under supervision, and the results were verified by 2 independent labs. This is solid evidence. Silence enveloped the courtroom. Some jurors nodded slightly, scribbling notes. The image of the astronomical odds, 1 in a trillion, flashed on the screen, embedding itself in their minds. When it was their turn, the defense attorney attempted a counterattack. He asked, "Sir, genealogical tracing is still new. Does it rely on voluntary unofficial databases?" The expert nodded, "Yes, but let me clarify. Genealogical tracing was only a guiding tool. We didn't convict anyone based on it. The direct evidence comes from the perfect match between DeLuca's DNA and the crime scene sample. Genealogy merely pointed us to the right door. DNA opened it." The attorney persisted. Could the sample under Layla's nails have been contaminated in storage over nearly 20 years? The expert replied immediately. "We have strict cross-contamination controls, and to be certain, we sequenced the entire sample. That DNA was completely consistent, showing no signs of mixing. It's the intact genetic profile of a single individual." The jury followed each exchange intently. As the presentation ended, the prosecution had the expert repeat the figure, 1 in a trillion. His voice echoed in the courtroom. "This is the level of certainty equivalent to knowing the sun will rise tomorrow." As the witness stepped down, the atmosphere solidified. Jurors exchanged glances, many leaning toward the prosecution. All understood, science had firmly tied Anthony DeLuca to the night of March 18, 2004. The night Rivera Layla vanished. After weeks of intense arguments, the day of the verdict arrived. The Duval County courtroom was as packed as opening day, but the air was heavier. Layla's family sat in the front row, eyes red but resolute. Anthony DeLuca sat at the defendant's table, his face gaunt, graying hair falling over his forehead, hands tightly clasped, awaiting what he likely knew was coming. The judge signaled, and the jury entered. Silence prevailed, broken only by the sound of shoes on the tile floor. The jury foreperson stood, voice firm. "We, the jury, having reviewed all evidence, find the defendant Anthony DeLuca guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping." The courtroom erupted. Some wept, others embraced tightly. Layla's father buried his head in his wife's shoulder, tears streaming. The prosecutor shook hands with the team, knowing their long pursuit of justice had reached its end. Meanwhile, DeLuca sat motionless, lips trembling, eyes vacant. No more sneers, no more excuses, just absolute defeat. The judge delivered the sentence, "Anthony DeLuca, for the crimes of first-degree murder and kidnapping, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your life behind bars." The gavel struck, resolute. The news spread instantly. Within hours, every Florida TV station aired special reports. Jacksonville cold case. Anthony DeLuca sentenced to life after 19 years. Newspapers ran bold headlines. The killer was a neighbor. For Jacksonville's community, the shock wasn't just the verdict, but the realization that the murderer had lived among them, described by some residents as quiet but friendly. A woman who lived in the same complex in 2004 told a reporter, "He greeted me every morning, even helped when my car broke down." Who'd think he was the monster behind Layla's case? Her words deepened the public shock. People discussed how his ordinariness had masked his true nature for years. Layla's family held a small memorial at her old apartment complex where she vanished. Hundreds of residents brought flowers, candles, and photos of Layla. Her mother stood before the crowd, choking back tears. "We waited nearly 20 years. Justice has finally come. Layla, you can rest now." At a post-trial press conference, Jacksonville police announced they wouldn't stop. They revealed plans to use new funding to send dozens more DNA samples from other cold cases to advanced labs. "Rivera Layla isn't the only case," the spokesperson said, voice resolute. "There are other families waiting for answers. Genetic genealogy has proven its value, and we'll use it to keep seeking justice." The media elevated Layla's case as a milestone. Articles detailed the journey from that March 2004 night when the 24-year-old vanished from her apartment with groceries untouched, through years of stalled investigations, an anonymous letter, and a long cold file. Finally, DNA technology paved the way from a tiny skin sample under her nails to a snapshot rendering to the DeLuca family, and ending with a life sentence. For Layla's family, the trial's closure marked the end of a painful journey. After 19 years, they could finally bury their daughter in the family cemetery. At the burial, hundreds of Jacksonville residents attended. White candles, lilies, and signs reading "Justice for Layla" covered the grass. Her father stood by the coffin, voice breaking, "Our daughter waited too long to rest. Today we can tell her justice has come." For Jacksonville's community, the case left an indelible mark. It reminded them that evil sometimes hides in plain sight, in the guise of a harmless neighbor, but it also restored faith. No case is truly dead, and justice may come late, but not forgotten. As the Rivera Layla file was closed, it not only marked the end of a case, but opened a new era for criminal investigations in Florida. An era where DNA and genetic genealogy became key tools to solve mysteries once thought buried forever. In the quiet of the cemetery that day, where sunlight fell on her new grave, Rivera Layla finally found peace, after 19 years of waiting. The story of Rivera Layla, a young woman who vanished from her apartment in 2004 and whose truth was uncovered after nearly 2 decades, is not just a shocking criminal case, but a reflection of many issues in American society today. Layla had told friends she felt watched while shopping at Publix at night, but this detail was dismissed until it was too late. It's a reminder that feelings of unease, however vague, deserve to be taken seriously. The years it took to connect Layla's DNA to suspect Anthony DeLuca highlight the limitations of technology and investigative processes at the time. Yet, the breakthrough via genetic genealogy proves that persistence and scientific advancements can restore justice even when hope has nearly faded. In today's America, where communities still face the risk of disappearances, especially among women and children, the lessons are clear. Always inform family or friends of your plans, trust your instincts when sensing danger, and proactively use personal safety tools. On a societal level, the story underscores the importance of investing in forensic technology and maintaining cold case units, because justice should have no expiration date. From Layla, we learn that personal safety must never be taken lightly, and that communities need vigilance and mutual support to prevent such tragedies from recurring. Thank you for joining us in revisiting the journey to justice for Rivera Layla after nearly 2 decades in the shadows. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more shocking cold case stories. See you in the next video.